Just because, I don't know, in my head, like, all windows are glass, but not all glass is windows.
Themselves into stardust. I'm a fan of funding ballsy founders, which includes...
Wow, you look lost, but I think we just found you deaf by myself this morning. They were awake. Hello and welcome to the third part? Is it third? We haven't lost it yet. Hello and welcome to the third part of the Criminology one-on-one series. We are continuing on to Strong, this time going straight into one of the most famous criminology theories in general, and that's broken windows theory. I was convinced, I don't know, I remember this thing as broken glass theory, just because, I don't know, in my head, like, all windows are glass, but not all glass is windows. Remember it as broken windows theory, okay? Let's dive straight in. Maja, wake the fuck up! If you're new here, hi, my name is Maja. Whenever I was a couple of years younger than this, I did masters in criminology, hence why the interest and why I'm compiling these theories for you. It's for education, entertainment purposes, also it doesn't actually replace you studying the books, so just saying, I'm simplifying it for everybody to be able to understand. Cool, now that I got that out of the way, onto the broken windows. It's actually easiest to explain it with the earliest example or the experiment for the broken windows, which was stated in 1969. When this psychologist Zimbardo, we're going to talk about Zimbardo, I'm pretty sure, in yet another theory. So Zimbardo set up for the two cars to be set in two different neighborhoods. One was in Bronx and the other one is in Palo Alto in California. So obviously poorer area and then like poshy posh. Now what was so special about these cars? He removed the license plate of each car and both of them are in the same condition, so both of them had a hood up. So what he observed is that within hours of the Bronx car being in that neighborhood, people have vandalized it. They have taken, within that same first day, they have taken everything valuable off this car. They vandalized it, and by the end of the day, children were using it as a playground. What happened with the Palo Alto one is that for a week, nobody has touched the car. But as soon as Zimbardo sent somebody to break a window onto this car, people immediately started vandalizing it. So it was the Caucasian family of like well-dressed people that just vandalized this car. So what he concluded was that in the Bronx, which is area that is used to vandalism, used to theft, they became apathetic towards this crime. So obviously this vandalism occurred earlier. But the same can happen in rich neighborhoods once you lower that barrier. Once the civilism is no longer there, and once you lower the civilism by the actions of apathy, people find it justifiable to ruin the property again. Now it's easy obviously to understand why this has happened in the Bronx area. However, why has it happened in Palo Alto? It's like a Caucasian family that's dressed as usual, that hasn't touched this car for about a week. Well, the easiest way to explain it is the no one cares kind of motto. It's not that one family are window lovers and the other one are not. It's that because of the condition on the window, so once you leave it unrepaired, it just welcomes everybody because it gives the idea that no one cares, so why should you? And in general, this can be applied to so many situations in life. I remember so many times because I disgusted by gum. Personal story, completely unrelated to broken windows. But when people would be like, yeah, why don't you clean it when you find it underneath the desk? I'm like, well, like 10 people that sat here before me didn't clean it, so why would I clean it? So, it's very easy to understand is what I'm trying to say. But broken windows specifically applies to this kind of concept. And it was first introduced by James Wilson and George Kelling for the Atlantic Monthly in 1982, so about 13 years after Zimbardo conducted his experiment. We could also see what happened in Palo Alto in California as two things. So one is once everything was under control, there were no broken windows, that it gave people the sense that everything is as normal, that there's no criminals lurking around, and that any kind of disorder, any kind of criminal behavior is not tolerated. Whereas when somebody has broken that window, suddenly it welcomes the criminals because suddenly they're like, well, there's no risk of detection because they have now waited, you know, nobody has caught whoever has broken that window, so why not proceed to vandalize it even more? this theory goes further to say that the broken window is actually, it's not about the broken window, it's what it symbolizes. Because this theory in general tells you that landscape can actually communicate with people. And it goes against what you might think, which is this cohesiveness, because it kind of proves in both neighborhoods the same thing would happen. It's just a matter of time, because what you would expect is for the neighbors to unite, to become cohesive, and to actually fix the social problems that they have. But what actually happens is the opposite. Now, let's say you're in Zimbardo's 1969 situation. You have just witnessed vandalism, so obviously you actually decide to ring up the police, and you're like, hey, this is not okay, if somebody's vandalized this, they're using it as children's playground, and the police comes. Now, usually, even if they catch somebody, that's probably the first-time offender, or they just see an act of vandalism. Nobody has been hurt, there wasn't like any personal battery, so they don't really care much. They would make a report, but it isn't like their priority, it isn't on their priority list. So obviously that gives criminal actually the sense that they have now evaded crime. And if that car is now left in that condition, it will just let those people know that there is no sense of detection, they will not be detected, so it encourages people to continue vandalizing that neighborhood further. What you're thinking now probably is, well, okay, the police doesn't do something, so like, let's say the police doesn't do something in all these situations, when you ring them up and they're like, well, we can't really do much, you know, it's not our priority, we're not really into catching it, there's no CCTV cameras here. Well, then you're like, well, why don't people move in the first place? Well, simple reason is that those people in that neighborhood where it keeps repeating itself are already not in the condition to move. They're already in the poor neighborhoods. So it's everything you might think of. Transportation difficulties, connections to the neighborhood, to the church, but also because what you're thinking about here, when you think about the Bronx as well, is, well, the connections that they have to their turf. There's mobs, there's different gang wars, there's people that actually belong to that territory, and they know that regardless of this vandalism, they're eventually going to be able to claim the power over that territory, maybe vandalize somebody else's because of these turf wars. Also, when it comes to why don't you move theory, you need to realize, well, first of all, the people that can't move are probably the elderly. And they have nothing to do with it. It's actually the young people that are causing these broken windows to happen. But it's also about who is on the streets more, who is more exposed to this type of crime. And it's usually young men actually, versus young women, just because again, young women are aware of what can happen in certain types of neighborhoods. So thinking about why don't you move, it's the fact that people in those neighborhoods either don't have an option, or is that people are not even thinking that they are at risk, whereas the ones that are actually on the streets exposed to this type of violence, exposed to this type of crime, don't even realize that they should be the ones fearful and they should maybe be the ones moving away. And in situations of like what happens once you actually like ring the police, let's say the situation is that they have actually made the arrest. Usually in those cases, those people can't actually afford a lawyer to begin with, because obviously they don't care about this Palo Alto thing. They would probably accuse somebody again that's not from the neighborhood. We're really focusing on the Bronx here, and well, what would happen is people usually wouldn't be able to afford a lawyer, and certain biases would be applied by the police. So it would usually be minorities that will be arrested, people of different race, or sex workers, for example. So obviously rights were enjoyed by any serious criminals who might actually be in charge of this because they can afford a lawyer, or just because everybody fears them in the neighborhood. Rather than the like bottom feeders, the people at the other end of the chain, they would just be announced guilty for these crimes. And how people proposed solving something like broken windows. One of the efficient ways was the patrol. So rather than cars patrolling around, more like foot patrol. This is when it comes to the police. So there's different kind of solutions, but when it comes to the police, people have found foot patrolling to be most effective. Why is that? As you might have actually encountered yourself on the street, not even doing anything, but when you see like police patrolling, you know, they might like kind of stop the car, look around the neighborhood, pull the window down, be like, hey, everything okay? And then obviously you're like, yeah, I'm not causing any trouble. And then they pull up the window and they just move on. Whereas you kind of get more of a sense of what's actually happening, where you are on foot, Also, it's easier to run after people and actually make arrests that way. Also, something people don't really think about is that physical barrier of the door. So when somebody pulls up, rolls down that window, you know, it's kind of like a stare down moment, versus like when you're actually physically present, you can actually physically talk to people, relate to them. It's like, yes, you're still in uniform, but they understand it's foot patrol and you feel safe. Except if you're me, and when I see two cops on the street, I'm like, something has happened. No, there's reason for a foot patrol. There's like an acid attack or something. I'm just a paranoid person. Don't live like me. Cool. And again, what people have realized for years and years is that there is a certain level of mockery when it comes to car patrolling. Because obviously, like, again, because of this barrier, like as soon as they pull up that window and kind of move on, you're kind of inclined to make a mock of like, oh, look at them, you know, like just thinking they're patrolling. Versus when it's actually foot patrol, you kind of like understand the person better. They have a better view of their surroundings, of what's happening as well. And it's just more personal. You're less inclined to see that kind of patrolling as a joke. And on the note of patrolling or just police in general, obviously they're going to be allocated wherever the crime rates are at a hopeless level. So wherever this has happened so many times, so obviously that leaves every other area neglected. So we're talking about the neighborhoods where this sense of fear is already so huge because it has been disregarded so many times. Just the community and the social norms have been torn apart because neighbors are not sticking together, community is not sticking together. Vandalism keeps happening constantly and there's no solutions to it. So what police should really do is kind of look at different neighborhoods and see where they're able to allocate additional police force, so like additional police officer patrolling here and there just to instill that sense of safety. And in a sense, if the right thing for that neighborhood isn't done, this theory outlines that if one window in the building is left broken and not repaired, the probability is that soon after all of the windows in that building will be broken. Speaking of what the right thing is, there's multiple things that need to be done, but basically the best way to prevent it is to notice it early. So let's say a police officer is patrolling, they notice a broken window, they immediately try to arrange with the council, with the police to have it fixed. If there's any litter, there's like glass on the floor, to have that cleaned. If there's any just general litter, like the appearance of the community kind of looks rough, clear that up so it doesn't even appear like there was any broken windows there, because then the sense of community is restored from the outside. Well, then that area looks covered, it looks like somebody's taking care of it, so obviously you know that you're going to be detected if you plan to break that window again or just break it in the first place. This way there's no even reason to question like, well, why don't you leave, like if that window was broken, because you're like, well, it was repaired. So as a respectable citizen of that area, you don't even want to move, you don't feel the fear. Now, according to Newman's work in 1972, the police is not the only factor, it should actually be the community, or like the balance of both. It contributes to these broken windows not escalating, not going any further, because yes, you might have like somebody patrolling your neighborhood, but it might not happen, like it might happen once a week, so what happens for the rest of the days? But the community needs to stay alert and make sure they're not negligent to the issues that they have. So make sure that you do report every time, that you don't just see it and think like, hey, somebody else is gonna report it. I remember listening to this podcasters Shrunham story of like how there was one town where like nobody reported a crime because they just thought like, hey, well, about 10 other people witnessed it from all these different places, somebody must have reported it. So it's avoiding that kind of mentality in these situations. So we spoke about patrolling, we spoke about like the mix of community related to the police, and now let's speak about the informal social patrols. So there's two versions, one more successful than the other. The more successful one is community watchmen. The less successful version of that, and when it escalates, is vigilantes. Let me know, I mean, it would be interesting to make just like a video on vigilantes just in general when it comes to criminology, because it's such an interesting concept. There's all these different groups to talk about, so let me know down in the comments if you do want a video like that. So the more successful by all of these studies is just having community watchmen. So somebody that doesn't take the matter into their own hands. They just patrols, just make sure everybody knows, hey, somebody's always watching, they're monitoring the neighborhood, obviously having multiple people in the neighborhood to do this, rather than vigilantes, which are group, like there have been so many groups of vigilantes, but they usually take the matter into their own hands. Like they see something and they fight you. They act as a policeman. They're like, no, I'm your judge, jury, and executioner. And you're like, you actually don't have the right to do that, and they usually then get in trouble, and then it's just a circle of even being worse of a problem, because now what, like if you were a thief, just if you're looking at this from the outside, now you have seen a broken window scene, like you have seen that that area is already messed up and like already nobody cares, and then you see somebody taking the matter into their own hands, so they're acting as the person like who is technically against their neighborhood as well, and you're like, well, might as well come here again tonight. Just because the police is now preoccupied with them, so they're not gonna care about me, I'm gonna vandalize some more windows in this neighborhood. However, as I mentioned before, whatever you do, the balance needs to be right, but also you need to realize how not to criminalize certain populations, which again inhabit these kind of neighborhoods as well. So now, due to Black Lives Matter, there has actually been an essay kind of pointing this really well. Dorothy Roberts' article, Forward, Race, Vagueness and the Social Meaning of Order Maintenance and Policing, states that people of color are particularly disenfranchised. She called it a cover for racist behavior because it's the perception that the police have of who commits these particular kind of crimes that gets those people in trouble, rather than the patrol, the community actually seeing who is committed a crime. So this perception kind of needs to change. This is rooted since the beginning, since 1969, since the beginning of this thing. So people need to realize that it's not a perception of who you see committing this crime, it's that as soon as that threshold is broken down, like that's the part you need to focus on, for that threshold not to drop, for everybody to be involved in what happens in the community, for everybody to be watchful, to make sure that the crime doesn't actually happen, because as soon as that threshold is broken, you can have somebody in suit and tie coming in and making sure all the rest of the windows are broken. Now let's end this on a positive note, and let's talk about some of the solutions for this type of crime as implemented in different neighborhoods. So I found this one particularly smart. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, they have deployed this deterrence program. It was called Safe Streets, and it was deployed in the 1990s. So they kind of operated on the basis of, you know how in the US, in the West there's prevalently roadways, whereas in the East you have prevalently subways and like metro as a mode of transport. In one or the other, you're gonna have either roadway-based crime or you're gonna have subway-based crime. So they have applied this kind of strategy, and the Safe Streets has in Albuquerque, New Mexico, saturated the high crime rates zones where like car crashes would happen, where you would have high crime rates. They have saturated these with these cops in order to deter this crime from happening in the first place. So Safe Streets has been particularly successful because it gives you a good strategy for deterrence of true crime in the first place. Another one, and this is again super interesting, was 2005 in Lowell in Massachusetts. Is it Lowell? Is it Lowell? Soz. Researchers from Harvard and Suffolk University worked with the police to identify 34 crime hotspots across the area. So what they have done, they have split that, and in the 17 of those, the police has actually helped out, like introduce mental health services, clean up after people, introduce better homeless shelters, basically just actually pipe in and like help the community clean up all of these broken windows kind of areas. Whereas in the rest of the 17 ones, they haven't changed anything. The outcome of the experiment was that in the first half, in the one where they actually helped out, there has been 20% in reduction of the police calls to the neighborhood. And what they have concluded is that it's not just that there was reduction in calls, but it's the actual cleaning of the physical environment that has worked in these cases, rather than making premature arrests or just like putting fear into the environment. It was more like actually cleaning up the physical environment, making sure it all appears better from the outside. So what's the conclusion of all of this? I would say it's a balance of things. Community watchman has been proven to work really well, but then you kind of need to collaborate with the police. The neighborhood needs to be in a good relationship with the police. And also the police has to do its part to make sure they don't make these perceptions, that they don't have the bias of like who does what type of crime. But also you need to see what works for what neighborhood, like I have explained with these examples for the solutions, because obviously what might work in a small town of 10,000 people might not work for New York. And just from the beginning of this episode, when I explained the Bronx and the Palo Alto, again, different approaches might work for these two neighborhoods. And the key really is the deterrence of the crime. So to be able to spot where the neighborhood is already looking kind of shabby from the outside, there have been certain crimes that might indicate that a window might be broken and then everything is going to unravel from there. And making sure that the community watchmen, the police, everybody is alerted in order to prevent that from happening. Because as we know, once it happens, it's just this circle where it goes downhill, and then it just opens the opportunity for other windows to be broken, for further vandalism and further crime to happen. So the motto should be, if you can prevent, if you didn't prevent in the first place, then protect. Wow, what a strong ending of the episode. That's it on broken windows theory. There's a lot more criminologists and psychologists that have looked into this, a lot more successful experiments, but I kind of wanted to just like simplify it and explain in such a way that even if you didn't study criminology, you can understand the concept and understand what kind of really needs to be done. So don't turn to a blind eye. If you learned anything from this episode, if you have one takeaway, don't turn the blind eye to anything that's happening in your neighborhood, because if you do, then it might just unravel and then, it's too late. Then you gotta protect and you gotta have police patrolling it every day. And we don't want that. Nobody wants that. You wanna be free and living your best life in your neighborhood and not have to move ever. Yeah. That's it from me. Drop down in the comments below what other theories you want to know. If you're a criminology student, be like, hey, I'm writing an essay on this. Hit me up. No, you actually need to read for the essay. Sorry, you actually need to reference a lot of other sources, not this YouTube video. Please don't reference me in your essays. Referencing random YouTube girl. That will not bring you any bonus points, kiddos. No. So, yeah, that's it. I have nothing else to tell you and nothing else to say. So this is goodbye until the next one, until next Wednesday. See you then. See you there. Better be there. Better be there.